the experiment continues. And did we ever get the very first time we did this up somewhere?
Yes.
Where did we get it up to?
Facebook.
Facebook?
I mean, YouTube.
YouTube?
Yes.
Well, we're waiting for someone to come back from Mexico so we can actually put our chant sheets on our webpage, because unfortunately, when I said, tell everybody how to do this, he didn't. So we don't know how to get on there and get the chant sheets uploaded for people at a distance to go ahead and chant along with us on Sunday morning. But that's coming. We'll probably see him next week, and maybe I can get him to take care of that. Or to tell other people. I don't really need him to do it, I just need somebody to do it. When I was young, my exposure had been to Japanese Buddhism as it is practiced in America. And for the most part, it was either Japanese teachers that had moved here or their first generation students that were teaching. And as I've remarked before, there really, in most instances, there wasn't a whole lot of Buddhism being taught. There was a lot of meditation being taught, but not a lot of Buddhism. And so I became aware that there didn't seem to be any concern for society by Buddhists in general, I guess is the best way to say it. And this talk is for Larry, who didn't make it today, but he made a suggestion about it. And his question was the Eightfold Path, was that invented by the Buddha later on to provide morality for Buddhism? I've never ever been asked a question even remotely like that. I don't think anybody ever thought of it, but Larry's a deep thinker. And so here I was, an American Buddhist, and I had converted to Buddhism because I read the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which are, for all intents and purposes, the very heart of Buddhism. Other things are incidental, truly, you know, things like the magic that the Tibetans perform and all of that sort of stuff, that's incidental. It isn't really an issue with Buddhism because they had incorporated Buddhism along with their native religion. But it's not incidental to talk about the Eightfold Path. And I looked at the Eightfold Path as a formula about how to live my life and to be remotely happy, partially happy, somewhat happy. Because the Eightfold Path, first thing is, in the last couple of months I've read a number of different translations of what the Buddha's Four Noble Truths were. And it's kind of interesting because maybe what I read early on was an interpretation of what the Buddha said. You know, and one of the things was the first noble truth is the existence of suffering. Well, I just saw that when I read it, I just saw that as here's my first sentence to grab you. You know, when I took journalism in high school, we were taught that your first sentence is your first chance and only chance to get someone to continue reading. And if you didn't get them with that first sentence, they were going to go on and read something else in the newspaper. So my impression, because remember I'm a high school kid when I'm reading about Buddhism, is here it is, you grab me. Life is full of suffering. Discontent, unhappiness, malice. And I thought, yeah. So I went on to the next sentence. And the next sentence said, but there's a knowable cause to suffering. Now this is what I recently read, which in all intents and purposes tells you nothing. It just says there's a knowable cause to suffering. Well, that's nice. But I was still hooked, so I read to the third one, which said, and the knowable cause can be repaired, fixed, changed, solved by the Noble Eightfold Path. And I thought, okay, in for a dime, in for a dollar. It's like starting a good detective's novel, you know. He gets you in the first 2 or 3 pages, and you just got to find out who was it that was murdered. So I went on to the fourth, and the fourth said, the solution to the whole problem is the Eightfold Path. Now, I want to tell you, that particular translation doesn't tell you anything. And that's not what I read. What I read was life was filled with discontent and unhappiness and suffering. Okay, that got me. The second thing I read was the cause of these things are knowable. The third thing was they are caused by attachment and desire. Uh-oh, I'm really hooked now. Attachment and desire. You mean when I asked that little blonde girl down the street when I was in 8th grade if she would go to the movie with me? And it took me months to get up enough nerve because I was so shy. But I used to walk her to the bus every morning. I'd go over to her house and hi. And I'd walk her to the bus and she said, no, I've got a chance to go clean out the stables at the horse farm. So I'm going to go and shovel horse poop. I was crushed. I thought, here I am offering her, I'd saved up my money doing yard work. I'd offered her a chance to go to the movie with me, to have some popcorn, maybe some of those bonbon ice creams. And she said, no, she'd rather go shovel shit. What a deal. Therein lies, and I went away with a broken heart. So I understood this thing about desire and attachment, at least at some level I understood it. And then the Buddha said, so here's the Eightfold Path. This will move you away from suffering and unhappiness. It will correct the problems of your desires and attachments. And I read the Eightfold Path. Now you got to understand, I didn't analyze anything. I was 15 years old, 15-year-olds. I know we read about these people that lived, you know, in England 200 years ago. And the guy, I just read about this guy who was, first he was an Anglican priest, and then he became a Catholic priest, and then became a Catholic bishop, deacon, and he was 15 when he decided all that. And he's reading John Locke and all these people, and I'm thinking, God, I was still digging out my Donald Duck comic books from underneath my bed and reading those at night, not telling anybody I was doing it. And here's somebody reading, you know, really thinking. No, I didn't think about it at all. I looked at the Eightfold Path and it made all the sense in the world to me. It said you had to have right understanding. Now, here's an interesting thing. I didn't understand what right understanding was for decades. I just went, okay. But I keyed on 2 or 3 things in there because I had a very smart mother who had told me that it was not how much money you made in life, it's how much you enjoyed what you were doing while you were making the money. Which translated into, because she told me, she said, I don't care what you do with your life. If you're a janitor, just be the best janitor. If you're a farmer, just be the best farmer. Her approach was just be the best at what you do. Probably the best advice she ever gave me. Certainly the one I remember, because it's not about how much money you make. Because nobody makes enough money to be happy. Have you noticed? If they made enough money to be happy, they wouldn't have all this credit card debt. I mean, really, let's look for the scientific proof here. They keep spending money. And the money, what they spend, does not make them happy. They buy a whole household of furniture. We used to have a monk here. And before he came here, he rented a room along with a bunch of other people who worked where he worked in a very nice house. I'd been there for Thanksgiving dinner. And it was a nice house, and he had a nice bedroom. And the guy that he rented from, and the reason why he rented these rooms out is it helped him pay the mortgage on the nice house. And one day he showed up, this fellow showed up, he had a whole box of doorknobs. And I looked at these doorknobs, these were high dollar doorknobs. These were not your, Target doorknobs that you can figure, well, I'm only gonna live in this house 2 years, they'll last long enough, and then somebody else can replace them. No, these were high dollar brushed stainless steel doorknobs. And I looked at all this and I said, what's wrong with these? And he says, well, he's had them long enough. How do you have a doorknob long enough? Because it was time to change. So he went through, or somebody went through his whole house, pulled all the door knocks, all the dead bolts out, all of this kind of stuff, and replaced them. That's kind of like saying, well, let's see, we've used these electrical outlets now for 6 years. I think I'll call an electrician and have him come change all of them. Yeah, just because I feel like it. I had to change a couple of electrical outlets a couple of months ago because you'd put a plug in it and it'd fall out. It was so loose. I understood why I did that, but I didn't understand why he replaced all these doorknobs. You go and walk into say, I had a friend, lifelong friend. She's still alive. He passed on. They were both my two oldest friends from high school. We'd get together every Christmas and have dinner. She'd cook dinner. She was a great cook. And she was always experimenting on us. She'd say, I've got this recipe and we're going to try it. Tell me what you think. Yeah, right. Oh, this is really bad. I drove all the way down to Long Beach to eat this bad food. No, I'd go, yo, this is great. Yeah, I really enjoy this. It seemed like every 4 or 5 years we'd go to her house and they had changed the furniture. And I said, your living room doesn't look like your living room anymore. And she go, oh, well, we got a new couch, we got a new coffee table, we got a new side table, we got a new chandelier, we got everything new. I finally said, why? After she'd done this 2 or 3 times, we got tired of it. So being able to go out and buy whatever you want to put in your living room obviously doesn't make you happy if happy is a condition we expect to last. Because eventually you become bored. And I have a very simple definition of boredom. I used to teach it to my high school students. When they'd go, I'm bored. And I'd go, well, boredom is when you're unhappy with your reality as it is and you pull away from it. That's what boredom is. You don't like your reality, so you pull away from it. So these were 2 people, very bright people, both with college degrees, both with good jobs, making lots of money. He drove an English sports car, you know, the kind you work on every weekend, that kind. Yeah, he was a talented guy, but they'd get bored with their furniture, so they'd replace it. So the Eightfold Path, it had a number of items in there. One of the items in there was right mindfulness. In other words, if you're paying attention to what's going on, probably everything's all right. If you're not paying attention to what's going on, you're probably pulling away from reality and you're unhappy. Oh, does that sound Zen? See, Zen is an expression of Buddhism. Buddhism is not an expression of Zen. We can get along without Zen and still have Buddhism. We cannot have Zen without Buddhism. If we have Zen without Buddhism, we have mindfulness meditation, which has absolutely no religious implications. It just tells you that you'll be happy in your life if you pay attention to what you're doing, which sounds very much like what the Buddha said, because that's where they took it from. And psychologists like it because if your blood pressure is high and you do mindfulness meditation, then your blood pressure will go down. Which of course happens in Zen. Zen masters don't die from high blood pressure. They also don't die from, being overstressed normally, unless they have young monks that don't pay attention to them. Then that's another deal altogether. But all of those 8 of the Eightfold Path, whether it be concentration, which is technically is called samadhi, or it's mindfulness, which we call vipassana, or it's right livelihood, or right speech, or right action. All of those things are about realizing non-attachment and essentially non-desire. Now, when I say that, that sounds so negative. Another topic we'll be talking about in another day is nihilism, because that was suggested. Because I asked everybody for a suggestion, so I'd have something idea to talk about. And Buddhism is not nihilism. When we say non-desire, I have to tell you about my first and foremost Zen master. Her name was Ethel Hawker, and she was my grandmother. And she took to raising me at about the age of 60. And she had a very simple formula to how to approach life. If you can change it, do it. If you can't, move on. That's the way I say it. My grandmother would get upset about something that was going on. She'd put on her best dress, her little platform shoes that older people wear instead of high heels, whatever they call them. And she always put on her hat. And when she put on her hat, she was going out to do business. And she was going to see if she could change something. And if it changed, that was good. If it was not changed, you never heard a word about it again. Because her thing was, if you can do something about it, do it. If you can't, stop worrying about it. And we have a nice little sign that I've got to figure out where to put up, so people will see it, but it won't be too obtrusive, because Larry, who's not here, but Larry made this sign for us that says, give me the power to change the things I can change and accept the things I can't. And Grandma never went to a meeting of AA in her life because she was not an alcoholic, but she did have a shot of whiskey every night before she went to bed. It helped her sleep better. And she smoked a pack of cigarettes a week but never inhaled. And she lived to be 96. Change it if you can, accept it if you can't. So when we talk about desires, well, I desired to go on a date with this little blonde-headed girl, and it'd be nice if I could have, but I couldn't. So I didn't know about that at that time, so I moped around for a few days until I forgot about it. So here I am, and I'm wearing a brown robe, and I have a lady that comes up to me by the name of Jenny Kwan, who I have not seen in 35 years. I had to stop and think. And she said, we are getting the local chapter of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship active again because it fell into disuse. And we would like to have a monk there for a meeting. And we're going to meet in Santa Monica. Could you come to that meeting? Well, I had already moved up here. But I was going down there to help at the temple down there, and I said, sure. So I went to the meeting. And everybody was a-talking. And I didn't hear anybody talk about, now you got to understand, I'd start to feel guilty about the religion I'd had all my adult life, because, the Salvation Army gives out donuts and coffee, right? I had a sergeant when I was in the Army tell me one time, he was an old guy, been in World War II. He told me, he says, you always want to make a donation to the Salvation Army at Christmas. And I said, why? He said, when I was in Europe, they were always there making donuts and giving us coffee. The Red Cross was there selling them. Somebody that hears that's not going to like it, but that's what he told me. I'm just repeating what he said. So he said, anytime you get a chance, always support the Salvation Army. And I thought that was a good deal. And when I went into the service, I lived in Los Angeles, and I used to go downtown. I was off one day on Sunday, sometimes I'd go to the movie, and I'd see the mission. The mission has been there since the beginning of time. I almost felt like they built Los Angeles around the mission. And it's axiomatic to say that homeless people in Los Angeles always can get a meal every day because of that mission. But I didn't see that happening with Buddhism. And I went to this meeting of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which, by the way, is an inspired group by the master Nyat Han. And I listened to these people talking, and then they came up here, and the Zendo, we just started using the Zendo, the Boy Scouts. We had retired the Boy Scouts here because no parents would do anything. And our Zendo became what it originally was intended to be, which was a meditation hall instead of a Boy Scout meeting hall. And they came up here and they had their meeting, and I didn't realize how well organized the Buddhist Peace Fellowship was. But Jenny Kwan started off, and she didn't really need me there, she just needed me as a host. And then the great master Thich Nhat Hanh hosted them the next month at the Vietnamese temple in Los Angeles, and I went there and I listened to these people talk, and they were talking about, apparently we have a nuclear station somewhere. I know we had one in San Onofre, which they closed down. It basically wore out, but there was another one somewhere, and they were talking about going out and picketing at this nuclear station and laying down in the road so people couldn't go back and forth. And I listened to these people talk, and all I heard was anger. They were going to get them. It was a them and us situation. And you know what a them and us situation is. Usually it's where you work. The workers are us, and the bosses are them, and they never quite give you what you want. And I listened to all that, and they talked for 45 minutes, an hour, trying to organize this societal disruption. Kind of like what we've got going on now. And they finally asked my opinion. And I gave it to them, and you know what, I never had to go to LA again, because they never invited me back. And I said to them, I think what you need to do is deal with your anger, and once you're no longer angry, then you can teach other people how to be peaceful. But as long as you're upset, why wouldn't everybody else react in the same way? I said, the Buddha taught that hatred is never turned by hatred. It's only turned by love. And of course we know that that's a reality, because hatred begets hatred. So I walked out of there and I thought, well, so that's Buddhism's answer to the Salvation Army and the mission, is to go out and lay in the road so the people that take care of the nuclear station can't get in. And somehow that's going to solve the problems of the world. And then I met a monk about 30 years ago, give or take a couple of years. And it was November, and we were coming up on Christmas, and you know, California doesn't get that cold, right? Well, unless you live in Apple Valley, and then sometimes you get snow. And if you don't get snow, you get hail or sleet. And if you don't get either of those, you get a really cold rain. And this monk, who at the time, he's 92 now, so he's a little bit older than me, but he was 60-something then. And he went out, because monks get a little bit of money. We get an envelope given to us, usually red in color, and people will give those to us on holidays, so we have some money to do things like buy gas, pay our insurance, stuff like that. Now, the Vietnamese and other good Buddhists usually bring food to the monks, so we don't normally have to buy food. But there are expenses. And he had saved up whatever money he'd been given, and he asked people to give him some money. And he went out and he bought 100 parka coats. And he bought 100 sleeping bags. And he bought 100 blankets. And then he asked ladies who come to the temple. The Vietnamese monks are very lucky. We're lucky. We have a lady that comes every Sunday and cooks Vietnamese food for us, so that's what you're going to eat today. Miss Long was here. But in the Vietnamese temple, usually ladies take turns coming in all through the week. The monks have to make their own breakfast and they cook lunch and dinner for them. And a lot of times they bring the food. Sometimes they don't. And so he went and asked the ladies if they would cook food for 100 people. And then he invited these homeless people in Orange County to come have a vegetarian feast. And he gave each one of them a blanket, a sleeping bag, and a coat. And the last time I saw him, he was giving away 300 coats every year. So the Buddhist mission exists. We don't have a building that says come in and have a free meal. But I will tell you that if you're homeless and you need something to eat, but you own a computer and you're actually watching this, you should be able to go to any Buddhist temple about 11 o'clock. It doesn't matter whether they're Mahayana or Theravada or Tibetan. And if they don't feed you lunch, write me a letter and I'll give them a hard time. Because anybody that's at the temple when it's lunchtime gets fed. And then I found out about the Chinese. Now, when I was training at a Japanese temple, we never saw any other kinds of monks. We didn't even see any other Japanese monks or American in the Japanese tradition. It was just us. So I didn't know what the Chinese were doing or the Thai monks were doing or anybody else. And I found out about the Chinese. Almost all orphanages and hospitals in Taiwan, which now we can go to mainland China now, I'm sure it's going to be the same thing. Almost all of them were set up by Buddhist organizations. And it's typically the nuns, because if you want to get something done in this world, you go get a Buddhist nun and she'll get it done. The monks don't like it when I say it. It takes a monk typically 20 to 25 years to get enough money to build a temple. It takes nuns about 5 years. And they've got a temple built up. They just don't let go until they've got it. So I find out in China, they're doing all this work. Then I find out that even in Theravada monks, countries where sometimes the monks are thought of as lazy, in Thailand, the monks go out into the villages with a portable blackboard under their arm and they conduct school because they don't have a school system. And the only people who know how to read and write are the monks. And so they go out and they teach in the villages. We had a flood in Vietnam some years ago, and I went to a friend of mine's temple, and he had a little parking lot in front of it. I had to park on the street because the parking lot was full of clothes. They had boxed up all these clothes that they were shipping to Vietnam. So the morality is there. If morality is taking care of other people. And I can tell you that the heart of Buddhism is to stop thinking about yourself. Because if you think about yourself all the time, you're going to be miserable, aren't you? You haven't quite got enough money to buy the car you want. That little blonde girl didn't want to go to the movies with you. Right? You don't really have enough money to go out and have a steak dinner, so you're going to have to stay at home and have this Salisbury steak, whatever that is. So, no, the Eightfold Path was not designed to give morality to Buddhism. awareness of other people's suffering gave morality to Buddhism. And the Buddha spent 45 years basically saying the same message over and over again. Take care of each other. And the Buddha was a pretty smart guy. And when I go speak, or the Vietnamese and other people come here to the temple, because we get large groups the last couple, 3 years. We eat good, don't we, Mo?
Next video.
Oh, yeah, yeah. They bring us a lot of good food. The last thing I say to them is Buddhism is taking care of each other. That's what you need to do. Stop worrying about yourself and just take care of each other.